Morning, right here on Z 101.9 FM, and we're having a great conversation we call the Roundtable. Last week we started a discussion on climate resilience. Climate resilience, we all know, is the ability to anticipate, prepare, and respond to the hazardous events, trends, and disturbances that are related to the climate challenges that we're facing now. Basically, how to respond and adapt to it. That's climate resilience, and we're told that there are certain thresholds that we need to meet and all that. We'll have that discussion around this table today. It's roundtable time on the Friday edition of Z in the morning. Yes, don't forget there's a long weekend ahead, so let's make this one a lot more exciting. And to help us do justice to this very conversation, Dr. Yao Ajimamboafo, who is a senior research fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana, he will be joining us via Zoom. But we have in the studio with me right here is the Director for Climate Change, Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction, NADMO, Charlotte Norman. And we also to try and get through to Mr. Isaka Amonkote, who is a local governance expert, all to help us understand how to enhance capacity and resilience to climate change, especially in Accra and then also in the bigger context of Ghana and Africa. Welcome, Madam, to our studios.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
I hope the week has been all right.
Yes, it's been great.
We thank God. So we are in the season where you'll be called a lot these days. Media houses will be chasing you and all that, because anytime the rainy season sets in, NADMO becomes one of the... We forget NADMO exists until it starts raining, and disaster time we say, hey, NADMO, where are they bringing blankets and the rest? How has it been like in NADMO so far since the onset of the rains?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your listeners. I'd like to say that NADMO is perhaps predominantly visible when there are floods in Accra, for instance. But beyond that, there's so much that NADMO does. I think we need to market it more, highlight it more, project it more, so that the public has a better and proper understanding of the mandate of NADMO. So in this year, we have had some information and weather warnings from GMET, Ghana Meteorological Agency, telling us to expect more rains, to expect a lot of rains. And I think that this is all part of the climate change agenda. And so we have started with our usual sensitization, going to marketplaces, lorry parks, where the risk profile for flooding is high. In such areas, we have been present there doing a lot of work.
We'll come to the discussion on the climate change and the resiliency, Accra, Ghana, whatever it is. But recently you gave the NADMO gave a certain directive that people in low-lying areas should evacuate or look for places. What was that directive about?
Yeah, so for now, what we do is when the rains set in, we realize that people really don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. And that is part of the reason why we hear now and then somebody lost their lives. We hear now and then properties were destroyed, etc. So what NADMO is doing with the help of the World Bank is we are now locating safe havens. By safe havens, I mean places where people can be evacuated to whenever the flood waters are rising. And so once we get that information, we show you where your safe haven is, the nearest safe haven within your community, within your district, so that you can go there. And these places are usually places that are on higher ground, places that have the wash facilities, water hygiene, sanitation, places that are accessible to persons living with disability, places that have the gender lens in focus, so that we don't just dump everybody there. I mean, we have learned certain lessons from Akosombo. And so moving forward with the assistance of the GARID project, which is the Greater Accra Resilience Project, we are sort of looking at how we can get the safe havens to be really safe. Because sometimes you go to the assemblies and they say, we have safe havens in A, B, C, D. But when you get there, you realize that even that place gets flooded when there are heavy rains.
So it can't be safe.
Yes. So now what we're doing is we're consciously, intentionally going around to the various assemblies, going around with the environmental health persons, planning, fires, just for us, all of us, to come to an understanding of whether this place is actually safe so that people can be evacuated to those places.
Wow, there are safe havens in Accra here?
Indeed, there are.
Dansoma, where's safe haven? That's Ablekuma West. Yes, Ablekuma West. That's Ablekuma West have a safe haven.
Okay, so like I said, safe havens are just temporary places that you can accommodate people, so that there's no incidents of drowning, etc.
Exactly.
So if you have, for instance, a school that is built with a higher platform, it is a safe haven. If you have a hotel and they agree, if you have a church and the church agrees, all these are safe havens. Just a place that people are safe, evacuated there temporarily until the waters recede. And
the community would know because you would have done some public education in the community.
Exactly. We are going to, in the process of, once we finish and agree on the safe havens, then we're going to publicize it at the various district assemblies. We're going to do community engagements so that the people know where to go and where is designated as safe havens.
That's interesting. Is Doctor on the call? Okay, all right. When Doctor joins us, we would also get back to him on that. But now let's discuss the essence of this roundtable, which is the enhancing capacity and resilience to climate change. Last week we started this discussion, and I must say it was quite interesting. We brought an architect, we brought a civil engineer, we brought a hydrologist also on Dr. Yawajiman Boafo is on the call. He's a senior research fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies, and at the University of Ghana. Doc, you're welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you, Doc. So let's find out from you. Let's start the conversation from your end. Enhancing capacity and resilience to climate change. Using Ghana or Accra as a case study, what is this? What is resilience to climate change all about, and why should it be of importance to our listeners?
All right. Again, thank you, and good morning to your listeners and viewers all over the world. And as you pointed out rightly, there's a general acknowledgement, and as your video guest also pointed out, we now acknowledge that climate change is something that is part of us now. So we need to now find ways to deal with the impact that comes with it. And when it comes to the impact, there are several impacts of climate change. It's not just flooding because of excessive rainfall and other sort of factors that is driving flooding, but also issues around extreme heat. Extreme heat, thunderstorms, they all have different kinds of impacts. So what it means is that how do we as a community or as a city or as a country ensure that when these impacts come to us, we can be better prepared so that we can reduce the potential negative effect that it will have on us. When it will have on us, it will have on our community in general, including households, including our facilities and transport systems and all that stuff. So that requires what we call better planning and more what we call integrated design of systems, infrastructure at the household level, at the community level, that allows us to feel less negative impact. So that, again, the word resilience, how do we bounce back? How are we able to bounce back when the floods come? It doesn't come and destroy a whole household, or it doesn't destroy the most critical infrastructure in the system. So if you think about flooding now, which is now, a major concern in the city of Accra, in Kumasi, and many other cities in the country, you realize that anytime it rains heavily, it just destroys a lot of infrastructure and it makes people immobile, which is a big challenge. So with this acknowledgement, we now need to look at how we can, let's say, create better systems in our cities. If it's a drainage system, how do we ensure that they are big enough to be able to, allow water flow? How do we ensure that we have effective, like what I call early warning system, as it was being pointed out? How do you educate people in the different communities, different districts, that if there's likely to be flooding or if there's going to be a heavy rainstorm, this is how you prepare yourself. I think it's broadly letting people know and also preparing them to be able to get back to their old lives or lives that they used to live before the event came. So that's all the whole thing about resilience. Unfortunately, we are not doing that great yet as a country or as a city. So the discussion is around how we can be better at, getting restored to our old lives when these events come to us.
Thank you very much, Doc, for explaining that to us. Now, let me find from your angle let's pick a few of the very important areas in which climate is impacting, and then try and educate our listeners on how this impact is being felt. Let's start with agriculture. How is climate change impacting on agri?
All right. Thank you very much. We know that we've thought about several times. Ghana, despite the shift from agriculture as a country in terms of employment, there's still a significant, percentage of people involved in agriculture. And the agriculture that we have in Ghana is dominantly rain-fed. When we say rain-fed, it means that we rely on nature, we rely on what God gives us for our farmers to be able to, farm. And so what that means is that anytime there's a change, and which is what is happening all over the country, there's a change in the quantity of, let's say, rainfall that comes, it affects, planting. It affects the period for planting. And more critically, for instance, farmers traditionally have known the periods of the year that they will plant. And with climate change, we are now experiencing high variability or irregular, systems when it comes to the time that it will rain. So typically, it may rain a lot around this time of the year, maybe February, March, so that farmers begin to start to plant. But if there's no raining around this time, it means that farmers are not able to plant because they don't have the rain. So there's no proper irrigation system. That will obviously affect the time for food to be harvested because they don't have enough rain. If it rains too heavily as well, what happens? It destroys a lot of the the crops that have been planted. The flowers of crops are destroyed, means that yield eventually will be low. But beyond the rains, there's also the issue of drought. Okay, in many parts of the country, especially in northern regions, where there's longer period of drought. Drought in northern Ghana is normal. Let's say 4 months of drought is fine. But now we're having periods where there's no rain at all. So like 5-6 months, which is going to affect the time for planting. That also means that less food will be produced, and that eventually will slow down to people in urban areas. And then that was another issue. There's also the emergence of what we call different kinds of pests and diseases. These diseases are driven by changes in climatic conditions, humidity, the kind of temperature that we have. And these are also leading to impact on already planted crops or other kinds of, because if you look at the movement of different kinds of pests, insects, and all these things, they are driven by, the amount of, or the kind of weather that they have. So it's like migration. They may migrate to a new place because a certain condition is better for them. So generally, agriculture, right from clearing the land to preparing, the crops of planting to harvesting, each stage of it is affected by the change in the climatic conditions, which again, just to highlight, we're looking at temperature changes, you're looking at rainfall or precipitation changes, you're looking at humidity, you're looking at even thunderstorms, which all can destroy a whole area of farming. And this can also lead to issues like bushfires. And there are some scenarios whereby, bushfires have emerged because of, high temperature levels across the country. And that also can lead to the burning of a whole farm, which has been, cultivated by,
Hello, Doc. Yes, there was a brief break in your statement.
Okay, I was just saying that in summary, I hope you can hear me now.
Doc.
Hello? Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay. We can hear you.
Quite great. I was just summarizing by saying that when you look at the trends, generally, the impact can come in the form of, temperature, changes, can come in the form of precipitation, rainfall, dew, can come in the form of, what we call thunderstorms. Because if you look at all these things, for instance, when there's high temperature, it can also even lead to bushfires. In areas where, very dry conditions exist, bushfires can also lead to, the destruction of farms which have been, sometimes these farms are ready to be harvested, or these crops are ready to be harvested, then bushfire destroys it. So the impact, basically comes from the production of the crop, to clearing of the land, to, planting, to, harvesting. It affects every stage of it, which is why it's a big problem. So for Ghana, for instance, the fact that we still rely a lot on rain-fed agriculture, or agriculture that is dominantly nature-based, it means that we are very much impacted by the changes in, climatic conditions. And this is across the whole country, from the northern part all the way to the coastal belt, where different people engage in different forms of farming. And even in the fisheries industry as well, the fisheries sector, it's important to point out that the sea surface temperature is very high, which means that a lot of fishes don't come closer to where we're supposed to catch them. So these are broadly some of the issues when it comes to agriculture and climate change.
So much for helping us understand this. But therefore, it's almost a given to say that climate change would also have an effect on our water resources.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's actually a primary, what I call concern, because like I mentioned, even if you look at the amount of rain we receive, the water resources sometimes are, the volumes are increased by rainfall, but also, high temperatures due to high evapotranspiration, which is a big problem in itself. And so drying up of several water bodies in the dry season is a major concern. If you only need to go to, let's say, a good example would be going to the northern region or northern part of Ghana, semi-arid vegetation. And I mentioned that if you look at the extensive drought period which we're experiencing now, during those long dry periods, most of the water bodies dry up. And mind you, these water bodies are the rivers, the lakes that are used by people for daily activities, including farming. And so rest of the water table right from the north to the south, because it's so water that is moving around all over the place. So there is a significant impact on climate change on our water resources. But on the other hand, one could say that, for instance, in areas where there's high volume of water or rainfall, it could be beneficial for transportation, or it could also be beneficial for, let's say, hydroelectric power generation, if you look at it from their side. So we don't entirely look at it from the negative side. You can also have some positive angles coming to it, but how do you harness the positive effectively so that it doesn't turn out to be negative? So to highlight one other example, you realize what happened last year with the Akosombo Dam spillage. It was excessive water. We didn't plan for it, so it became a negative for a bad side of climate change. But if you had planned properly, you would have used that same water for other benefits.
Thank you so much. In your research, we'll come back to the studio and talk to Madam Norman on this very issue. But I want to touch with you. Is it true, or have you found, Doc, that climate change is now beginning to affect us in terms of human health? And in what ways, if it has?
Okay. So yes, of course, there is. In fact, just this morning, I published a paper on how climate change is driving diarrhea diseases in Ghana, in coastal communities. And in some of the findings in that work, many coastal communities, are very much prone to flooding, and that is a major concern. And flooding comes, and then basically in many of these communities also they have issues of sanitation. So more flooding means that sanitation concerns are huge, because the flooding comes and takes a lot of the sanitation into the communities, into the households, and that naturally means that children or even adults are exposed to diarrhea, dysentery, because of their food systems are very much exposed to flooding, and which also carries different kinds of bacteria and other factors. So there's a clear, what I call relationship between climate change and health. That is just one angle. In one other work that I did in northern Ghana, where we looked at the cerebrospinal meningitis, it's very much a disease of the semi-arid region, northern Ghana. And the findings show that anytime the temperatures go up or rise, it also leads to higher reporting numbers in CSF, which naturally gives you that sense of the thriving conditions for these sort of organisms that cause these sort of diseases. So, and globally, there's been a lot of work, in the IPCC, that's the global body that looks at climate change research and also reporting. We found several examples of, how, changes in weather, especially temperature, and even rainfall regions, humidity has driven different kinds of diseases. And there's also a lot of emerging diseases that are coming up that, is being researched. So there's a clear, relationship between changes in climatic conditions and the health of people. And maybe another example would be that even, for extreme heat in our cities, for instance, those of us in Accra, you recollect that in the early part of the year, there were several, reports of people suffering from extreme heat. In Ghana, it's not yet heat wave, but extreme heat is a major concern because we are even uncomfortable, and that in itself is something that leads to different kinds of, physical and sometimes, what I call internal health issues, especially for older people or vulnerable people like children, even pregnant women, studies that have shown that, higher exposure to extreme heat can affect, fetal development. So there is that sort of impact across.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yao Ajiman Boafo is Senior Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana, and was helping us understand the impact of climate change on our grade, on our health, on water bodies, and all that. Thank you so much. Let's come back to the studio to Madam Charlotte Norman, who happens to be the Director for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction at NADMO. Let's find out from Madam. So now that Doc has laid bare the extent to which climate change is really affecting us, let's look at some of the strategies for climate change adaptation and mitigation, which falls directly on your desk at NADMO. What are some of these strategies that we're talking about?
Okay, so when we talk about climate change and how to combat it, we are looking at mitigation, we're looking at adaptation.
Okay.
And so with these two, I mean, if you cannot mitigate it, or as you're trying to mitigate the situation, what you do is also find a way of adapting to it so that at least you don't get overwhelmed. Like we said, to be able to be resilient.
Okay.
Yes, so there are two separate things.
So you are either stopping it or you are learning to live with it.
Yes. Sometimes it is, you cannot stop it because some of these things are natural hazards. And so you can't stop it. But what you can do is mitigate it to a certain extent and then see how you can also adapt to it so that you do not get overwhelmed by it.
Interesting. Before we continue with the strategies, how long has NADMO had this seat or this department? Or is it a department?
It's a department.
Okay, how long has this department been there?
The climate change department has been in NADMO I have been in NADMO for 8 years, and the department, I think, was in operation about 3 years before I joined NADMO.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So it's something that you had sensed more than a decade ago, that there was a need for it.
Yes.
That's interesting. So what are some of the strategies that communities or Accra, Ghana can put, what are things that are being done or should be done if they are not being done to ensure that we mitigate first, then we come to adaptation? Let's start with mitigation.
Okay.
Or we start with adaptation. Whichever one. Which one comes first?
Okay. So I think mitigation would come first because you're trying to prevent it. And so you will talk about mitigation strategies. Now, one of the main strategies in mitigation is to reduce emissions, because we know that it is the excess emissions that are causing all these changes, that are giving us all this global warming. So if you look at how you want to reduce the emissions, then you'll be making headway. Just to remind you that if you look at the emissions being emitted worldwide, I mean, Ghana and Africa, we hardly emit anything. So what we are having is we are suffering from the brunt of those who have emitted a lot. In the very highly industrialized countries, they have emitted a lot, but we are bearing the brunt of it. But then in Ghana and in Africa, I think one of the main things for us is to reduce whatever emissions we are emitting at the moment. Now, so transition to renewable energy sources. This is one of the major things. And so to lower greenhouse gas emissions.
That is a huge conversation in itself. Maybe let me find out from Doc. Doc, the thing is this: it has been argued that these people used fossil fuels to develop themselves and became superpowers and became great economic countries and all that, very, very rich countries, if I could say that. We are yet to start, but when it got to our turn, we are being told to go green. Why wouldn't we go fossil fuel, develop Ghana, develop Africa, then also we can be at par with them? Doc, what is your take on this argument?
All right, so thank you. I think Ms. Norman talked about the two key issues when it comes to climate change, mitigation and adaptation. And yes, it is true that the countries in the global north, or what we call the so-called developed countries, use or rely a lot on fossil fuel technologies, which has been the primary contributor to climate change that we're experiencing today. And so they bear the biggest, brunt for the, the impact that we are having. And so if you're saying that we should not also rely on the same approach, one of the key issues that I think needs to be made clear is that, the world as we live in is one world. Our system is such that what impacts us impacts, other parts of the world, what impacts us. So, and there's no, when you look at climate change, as we talk about, there's no boundaries. So just because somebody, through ignorance made a mistake and then caused, what is the we are experiencing, it does not mean that you should follow the same path. And now I think there's proposals, we are looking at new technologies that can help us reduce or deal with the potential, sometimes even the unknown impact that, further change in climate will bring to us. So I guess the point here is that if you want to follow the same pattern, what it means is that we're going to also worsen the current situation that we're dealing with. And if you look at countries like Ghana, our ability to respond to the impact of climate change is not that good. So even though, again, Western countries, Europe and America, since they are also experiencing climate change, they are better able to deal with it than we are. So I think it's totally logical, and in my opinion, it makes sense that we look at the new, what we call climate resilient approach that relies less on fossil economy to develop. But what that means is that we need support. We need a lot of substantial financial support from, the global community so that we can follow this new path for development without necessarily harming the climate further or the planet further. Because there's no rationale in saying that I want to go along the same path when you know very well that that path is going to lead to chaos. So it just requires more help. And I think in the international community, even though I would say the efforts are not yielding too much financial support, there's still a lot of mechanisms in place. Like more recently, there's something called the loss and damage that requires, international, community, especially the global North countries, to support us in our climate change fight and ensure that some of the damages that have been caused by their actions will be, supported financially so that we can take care of it. So I personally feel like we need to go on the path of renewable energy. We need to go on the path of climate resilient development and still find a way to minimize our potential use of fossil fuel. So that's where then we have a global, sense of what is good for all of us, and not because we think somebody did it, that we follow the same path. That's my personal take on that.
Okay, Doctor, that was Dr. Yaw Jimembuafo from the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. And we've been joined also on the line by Mr. Isaka Amonkute, who is a local governance expert. Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning.
It's a pleasure having you on our roundtable today.
Thank you.
So we're talking climate change, and we've moved into the areas of strategies for climate change adaptation and mitigation. We just began, but I want your take on this whole climate change discussion and resilience. What is your general impression, or what's your general take on this?
Well, from the scientific aspect, or when we talk about technology, yes, there is climate change. But there are school of thought that are not seeing it. They don't feel it. They don't even appreciate it. They think that the climate scientists are like exaggerating and then over emphasizing on it. If you remember, the immediate past president of Brazil, he allowed people to enter into the Amazons and were cutting the trees and all that. And he said he doesn't believe in the climate change theory, Sometimes one becomes a little bit worried when we know used fridges, let's say electronic waste, car tires. They are all things that in the Western world, they spend a lot of resources to recycle them. So at the end, they push it to Africa, they push it to us here. And you go to aggregation, for instance, you see our brothers opening these gadgets and burning them raw, and at a point, I hear we were even the number one pollution country in the world or so, where they captured these agricultural people burning electronic waste, Then you ask yourself, those who are pushing these used computers, used TVs and things here, don't they know that we are all in the one global world? You see, so when it comes to vehicles, overused vehicles, yes, the monoxide that it generates, it creates problems, it have effects on the environment. Yes, yet they push them here in Africa as if we are isolated from the world, So, yes, the climate change is something that we have to look at as a global, phenomenon. But I wonder if the effect of flooding is seriously based on the climate change.
Point, Mr. Isaka Monkote is a local governance expert. So let's go then to Doc and find out from Dr. Yajimambuafo. Doc, first of all, Mr. Monkote touched on Jair Bolsonaro's activities whilst he was on the seat in Brazil. As a matter of fact, he's the one president that Greenpeace called a disaster for the environment. Jair Bolsonaro and the rest who don't believe that climate change is as serious as we are making it out to be. Doc, what are some of the things you say to people like that to attempt to change their minds?
All right. Again, I think we have to be very sincere with ourselves. And your last analyst pointed it out that the question is, why is it that Western countries are asking us to, or they are bringing their waste down, but yet they want us to say reduce emissions when they know that these are some of the causes of emissions. So I think we have to acknowledge that climate change is political as much as there's enough scientific evidence to show that it is a real event, it's a human-induced, happening. It still is a political issue. And so there are people who, for their own political, economic interests, will take a side that does not necessarily reflect the actual, incident or the event. Because again, anybody who appreciates science, who appreciates evidence, will tell you that the kind of evidence that has been put forward by climate change scientists and the global community, and even beyond the science, the actual impact. You need to only listen to informal science as well. Apart from formal science, which is classroom very much so, the informal science, that is what my great-grandfather would tell me, or what people, who live, let's say, who have lived for like 70, 80 years will tell you. They'll tell you that, for several years, this was the condition, and this is what it's changed. So people need to, be more interested or unbiased when it comes to what science offers. And I think that is something that, should be made clear to a lot of people all over the world. But like I said, it is an issue of environmental injustice because for some people, when something benefits them, they use it for their benefit. And for somebody like the Jair Bolsonaro, the former president, he had his own agenda. And sometimes people's, knowledge or people's what I call the world views are influenced by their religion or their culture or their economic interests or their political interests and what works for them, but not necessarily based on actual evidence of science. So people need to be made aware of the science more and more. And then what we need to do is that for those of us who have the evidence that can talk about, we need to highlight it more. And politicians need to also acknowledge that, their actions will have not just impact right now. It's not just about them. It's about, the generation unborn and how to impact them. And that includes their children. So I think more evidence is out there. People need to be interested. And this platform that we are using right now is one very important platform to highlight some of these issues. So it's up to us.
Okay, let's come to Madam Norman and find out from her. So what are the sources of what are major sources of emissions in this part of the world? For us, what are causing the emissions. And then we'll go to local governance. Mamonkote asked him what the challenges are to ensure that we reduce our emissions as a country.
Okay, so for us in Ghana, I think, like the last but one speaker rightly said, if you go to Agbobloshi, for instance, they are burning everywhere, and that is causing a great emissions for us. I mean, someone would say, oh, it's a very small portion, it's a very minute portion. But I remember when we had the unfortunate incident of the 9/11 incident in New York. I mean, years after, they were saying that, I mean, it's proven fact that the heat that emanated from just that incident.
Those Twin Towers.
Yes, it carried on for years, and it had so much ripple effect. And so we may not be the greatest emitters, but what we are is that in our own small way, we can find ways of reducing some of these emissions. So we should be more aware of how we dispose of, or how we burn, or how we work as a nation towards reduction of emissions. I think that, again, there's a need for sustainable transportation, where we promote public transport, cycling, and walking to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay, let's hold on public transportation. Let's come to Mr. Amonkote. Please, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Madam just spoke about the need for sustainable public transport, which then means that too many cars on the road is even a challenge. How come nothing has been done as a nation in terms of policy and all that to ensure that we have what we are now calling, or what we would call, sustainable public transport?
Well, I don't think we have the political muscle to go near this area. No party has that political muscle. Until recently, we are being told to pay, or we've been asked to pay levy on pollution. And I think it's about 2 levies on pollution. My question is, what are we doing with the money? Are we using it to aim, or what are we doing with that levy that we place on vehicles and fuel? Back to economic activities and impact on the environment. Every economic activity has some level of impact on the environment. So if it's about emission, and we are looking at vehicles, we must as well look at generators and other usage of fossil fuel. Most industries, most organizations, when there is no power, they have the alternative usage of generators. I wonder if we have been capturing the emissions out of generators based on environmental report that each company presents at the end of the year to EPA. Because all organizations and institutions are supposed to prepare environmental reports and present them to the EPA so that they can randomly come and test or run some visitations in these areas to check if filters have been changed in generators and all that. There's some servicing on gensets. I wonder if we are doing it. You see. So if it's about transport, yes, I see a lot of vehicles with this monoxide coming out here and there. And previously the police were apprehending them, but now everything has been left Anyhow, and then open burning. We are doing open burning in our various homes and towns and villages and all that. When there is a communal labor somewhere, you see people burning their refuse or whatever they collect, they're burning them. And if you are burning batteries, you are burning electronic waste, you are creating a whole lot of problems for the environment. I don't know whether the system needs to be recycled, the whole system itself, because if we allow open burning and we're talking about climate change and emissions, what are we doing? And people are still doing open burning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Isaka Amonkote, who is a local governance expert. He joins us on our roundtable today on Z in the morning. Let me go to Dr. Yawajiman Boafo. Doc, in your research, how important is, say, human economic activity vis-a-vis transportation day in and day out on climate change in terms of resilience or mitigation, if I could use that word?
Hi, okay. So I lost you earlier, but I think earlier on, Ms. Norman was talking about the key sectors of our economy that emit or that contributes to climate change. And so if you look at our life, issues of energy, and energy use comes from different sources. So from our transport sector to our homes, to our factories, and these are key emitters because they are the ones that are sending a lot of the different kinds of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere: carbon dioxide, methane, carbon monoxide. These are coming from our everyday activities. So they are measured when it comes to how to, do away with this sort of energy sources. And if you move away from that, agriculture sector, for instance, something that we call land use and forestry, they are the biggest contributor to emissions that we talk about, to climate change. And so, for instance, it contributes, let's say, around more than 30% of the emissions that we have in Ghana. And then we look at waste. The waste sector, sometimes we overlook the waste sector. So it's a major contributor as well to climate change because all the waste that we dump in our environment, in our landfill sites all over the country, all over the city, are also, contributing a lot of, methane gases, which, becomes a problem. That's why proper waste management or upcycling or, recycling of what we call waste products is so important. So what it means generally is that to deal with climate change, we need to find proper ways of dealing with these things or addressing these challenges, when it comes to the emissions that goes into the atmosphere.
Thank you so much, Doc. Madam Charlotte Norman, let me come back to you. So we've mentioned economic activity. Doc has also added land use, forestation challenges that we have, and then also the waste, our waste management and all that. What have you found to be other contributors to the climate challenges and the strategies that you think we should, aside the sustainable public transport, what are the other things that from the NADMO angle you think should be done?
Okay, so from the NADMO side, in terms of disaster management and disaster risk reduction, we need to enhance resilience by developing robust infrastructure to withstand extreme weather events. Now, we have lots of cases where whenever there's a flooding incident, for instance, in Accra, people cannot access the roads, cannot access bridges, cannot even go to the they can't use critical infrastructure. Telephone is not working, internet is not working, and these are things that affect. So we have to find ways of adapting to this. What do? We have to make sure that the infrastructure that we develop or what we have has climate considerations in it. And so if you're building a bridge, for instance, you don't build it to a certain height because you think it's just, but consider the fact that you can have excessive rains that will make that particular river or gutter or drain overflow and reach that height and make it dangerous for people. And so we should have climatic considerations in our infrastructure, both roads, bridges, critical infrastructure like hospitals, schools, we should have these climatic considerations. I think, again, when it comes to waste management, we should also think of recycling, because it's like, what's causing all this? It's because we dump everything together and then we burn everything, and we think that's the way to go. But if we can consciously begin to recycle, I know that even when you separate in your house, when it comes to collection, they put everything together. So the point is, why would I separate and then it will be put together? It's because that consciousness is not there. People don't know that, okay, so this day we're collecting bottles, we're collecting plastic waste. This day we're collecting this waste. I mean, if you go outside Europe, outside Africa, I mean, there are days of collecting of different kinds of rubbish. We can learn some of these things. I know it's difficult. I mean, we've tried to do this campaign and people come up with, oh, we don't even have what we're going to eat with the money we're going to eat, and then you want us to be... But these are all things that we should be guided by. The local assemblies should support us, should help us with this sensitization, so that once you have an understanding of something, you know the implication of your action or your inaction, then you'll be forced into action of some positive results. So I think that understanding and having a collaboration with the other stakeholders to support us in our work, it will go a long way to reduce the impacts of hazards in this country, because the hazard is there, but if it doesn't come into contact with vulnerability, etc., there will be no disaster. That is because it comes into contact with certain elements. That's why it becomes a disaster.
You spoke of critical infrastructure. Last week, in this very studio, on this very the part one of the roundtable, I recall Dr. Engineer Jewbuachi, Philip Jewbuachi, who is an hydrologist who was part of the Garrett project, tell us that there was an original intention to dam waters that were coming from the hilly areas of Accra to, yes, the eastern region area to somewhere around Atomic or something. But the land for that project is even finishing. It's been encroached on and all that. So that was one of the things he started on. Then he also started on the fact that Accra per se is already flat. So gradient-wise, we're already suffering on all of these things. First of all, I want to go to, so this is just on critical infrastructure. I want to go to Mr. Isaac Amonkote and ask him that as a local governance expert, what does he say, what does he see are the challenges that governments would go through so that projects like this couldn't fly? A project that would have dammed water, that otherwise would have come into Accra and flood Accra. How come we are not able to get along and pull such projects off? Mr. Amonkote.
Yeah, first of all, let's look at water inflows into Accra. It is not only on the Atomic stretch. Accra is surrounded by what we call the Chain Mountains, starting from Shai Hills across the Krapim Mountains or the Krapim Hilly areas, and then to Nsawam areas where we have Gono and Samsam, those areas, to Adesu areas, and then connect to Makati here. So if we allow economic activities on top of these hills by way of people building and doing all sorts of things uphill, when it rains, it must channel down with some speed. Now, we have about 5 water basins that channels into Accra. The Chemu Basin, the Lafa Basin, the Odo Basin, and then the Nyanshia Basin, and then we have the Sakumo Basin. So the Chemu Basin is around Pambros, Dansoman area. The Accra, Malam area is the Lafa Basin. Then the Atomic Nsawam stretch is the Odo Basin. Then we have the Gowlu, the one coming from Gowlu, the Nyanshia Basin. And then Sakumo is Tema, Nungwa and Teshi areas. Now, we have sat down the wetlands that originally supposed to receive excess water in the marshy areas. You know, we've taken over, virtually close, by way of our living and how we do our own things, we have, in fact, destroy all these wetlands. So, and then we have allowed economic activities to also come up the basins. So, people are building, road contractors are also diverting waterways and all that. So at the end of the day, when it rains, the water cannot even hit the central part of Accra before it goes into the sea. And there is no authority that is in charge of the physical development over these basins. Because if you want to tell me the assemblies should be able to do that, I'm sorry, they don't have that capacity. They don't have it. So which organization, which institution can deal with physical development along these water basins? Once a while, hydrologists at Ghana Highways will come in and then we want to build some storm drains. During President Kufuor's time, we put up these storm drains on the Onyanshia and the Odo River. The wetlands, for instance, Osu Klote had a wetland around the Osu Lagoon, the Osu Klote Lagoon. The lagoon is completely dead, and we've surrounded the whole wetlands with buildings. The Kpechin, we have also filtered the Kpechin somehow around the trade fair area, and we are building. Recently, we saw the Ramsar site where the Sakumo is, the kind of development going on there. When it comes to the Chemu, people are silting the Pambros area and building. So when the water is coming from the top, like from McCarthy Hill, where do you expect it to go? Besides that, the management of waste is also another headache. Yes, as you rightly said, if we want to create wetlands, let's say the one you said someone mentioned around Atomic area, then we need to demolish all the various buildings around that area and create the artificial wetlands so that we can hold the water and release it as and when we by way of controlling it. And then all the water basins, we do that on the water basins. That is where Accra can be saved. And even Accra itself, the Korle, people are silting the Korle and building. The Odo, people are silting it and building. So in effect, we are all creating the mess. Meanwhile, Accra has about 1.5 million people living anywhere they like in Accra. So such people, you can't capture them in any waste collection management because they are living anyhow. You understand? So the problems that, apart from these problems, economic activities within Accra, I don't see who goes to check on their environmental impact. You see, every economic activity has some impact on the environment. Every economic activity, even when it comes to, excuse me, this morning, prostitution. They use condoms and tea rolls and all that. It has impact on the environment. So if you are a field mechanic, you are a organizer, you are a carpenter, you run for future bar. Whatever you do, there is some impact on whatever you do. So we must have some documentation as to how you manage your waste. So if we have a fridge mechanic by the water channel, and then when it rains, and 10 of his old fridges just get into the water channel, what will happen? Mechanics by the roadside water channel, the vehicles rolling in the lotto kiosks rolling in the water channel. I mean, all these things will create blockage, and then we'll have floods. So we have to go back and reverse some of the things that we've sat down for people to misuse or misapply in the course of economic survival.
Sir, thank you so much. It's 9:15. That was Mr. Monkote, who is a local governance expert. And touching on a number of things he said, it seems to me that the first thing, therefore, must be policy. Policy and then implementation of the set policies. So I want to find out from Doc. Doc, if you're there, in your research, how important is policy to climate resilience as a nation? And then what are some of the policies you've seen in your research elsewhere that will be able to help us as Ghanaians in this drive?
Okay, so yes, policy is very important. And as Mr. Monkote said, in Accra, in Kumasi, in many of the emerging cities in the country, people are, let's say, establishing infrastructure or building anywhere, anyhow, anytime. But in truth, there is existing legal and policy framework for dealing with not just climate change, but disaster prevention and response in Ghana. And so if you look at the fact that Ms. Norman is in your studio, Ms. Norman is a key person, or her office, NADMO, is a key policy. That's one of the key legal frameworks for dealing with disasters. Actually, the most important when it comes to Ghana. So the NADMO has, basically made them responsible for coordinating, disaster prevention. There is prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery efforts in Ghana. So that's very fundamental. So what it means is that they have to be the people that, help them. But like also it was mentioned, they don't have all the capacity, and that's the reality. They don't have the capacity to be able to fully implement or act on, on the issue. There's also, we have the National Climate Change Policy, which, 2013 was put forward to try and ensure that we have what we call climate resilient and sustainable economy that allows us to also integrate the issues around adaptation and mitigation into climate change or international development practices. And I think this, for instance, also is important because, again, that provides us with a basis for action. And I think through the efforts at the MMDAs, at the different levels, MMDAs, ministry, department, municipal, they're all supposed to play different roles to ensure that we take note of the potential climate change impact in every part of our development. When you're doing a bridge, as was mentioned, back to that example, how do you construct a bridge to make sure that you don't block waterways? Or how do you ensure that you don't purposely put something in place? And then there's also a more recent one. There's what we call the Ghana National Adaptation Plan. The National Adaptation Plan is important because it's part of a broader global action at what we call enhancing the adaptive capacity and also strengthening resilience of people to climate change. And this is being done at the local level, from the local to the national level, to ensure that, for example, every district is clearly taking note of climate change impact on different sectors of their district economy, as well as different people within the district. There's also the EPA, which, again, people sometimes overlook them, but the EPA by itself, by the act that establishes them, is also empowered to regulate and manage environmental issues. So there's a lot in place already, and these examples that I'm citing are just hashing or rehashing what already exists and what we need to work on better in terms of building human capacity, for financially, resourcing them, and also creating more awareness to ensure that we can do better with the issues that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. But it seems to me that, yes, from what you said, then the policies are there. probably what prevents implementation of these policies? Maybe we should start with Mr. Monkote as a local governance expert. What are preventing governments from, as it were, implementing these policies to the letter so that these things are solved?
Yeah, political muscle. They don't have. They don't have, because if you want to implement policies, you are going to step on toes. You are going to move properties. You are going to move human beings, you know. And if you don't have the political will to do that, I'm sorry, we cannot do it.
Mr. Monkote is not, sorry to cut in.
Our various markets. Mm-hmm. There are people living in the market. Go to Malata. People are living in the market. Not that they have hotels or terminals or something there, but they are sleeping in the market. Some people are rearing cows in the market in Malata. If you close, you just drive through there and you will see it in the market, middle of the market.
And your argument is that their activities are also contributing to our climate challenges. However, these activities are not being captured in terms of policy and in terms of implementation and all that. Madam?
Yeah, not even just that. As I said earlier on, environmental impact assessment or impact report on every organization and institution in the country. Yes, we might have the policies, but how many institutions write environmental reports every year? Because you need to do it. And that is where we will know what you are doing with your electronic waste, what you are doing with your food waste, what you are doing with your paper waste. We will know it through the impact report. EPA is there, but I wonder if they go around to demand this report. And that's why I'm saying that, yes, with some of the hotels, I'm aware they prepare this report. Apart from the hotels, because they are multinationals, apart from them, the rest, you don't go there. I mean, it becomes a political something. For instance, Ghana police, we go and check if they have a report written in the past 10 years.
So you're asking for all MMDAs, SOEs, to regularly provide environmental impact reports to give an impression or to give us a good idea of what their activities are contributing to the environment.
Exactly. So that we can mitigate it. Even if you ask the coffin maker to give you a report, because his business is also having effect on the environment. Even if it's a law firm, they must give you a report because they are in a building, and some kind of environmental impact report must be written. And that is why I earlier on said generators, for instance, because if you want to effectively do these things, yes, the policies are there, but implementing them is the problem. Implementing the policies. In government, we don't have the muscles to do that, the political muscle to do that.
Mr. Monkote, is it part of the mandate of EPA to enforce preparation of such reports?
Yes. Yes.
And they are not doing it. Yes. They are not doing it.
Yes. As for EPA, yes. They are supposed to demand yearly reports. So it will tell us the number of visitors you have in your around the year, the energy that you have used, the fire safety system, everything that has something to do with the environment. You're supposed to get it written in the report. And then we will do assessment. You know, you're even pushing your liquid waste into the environment. How do you do it in your institution? You know, it's a whole environmental management system. It's a whole package, but we are not doing it as a nation. It's, a few institutions here and there that I have been preparing this report.
Do we know why EPA is unable to push for the preparation of these reports?
Maybe we contact the EPA boss.
So I think we should find out from them why they are unable to push for. Let's come to the studio and ask Nadmo. Nadmo, do you prepare annual reports according to what? Environmental reports. Mr. Amokote said I should find out. Nadmo is in the studio. We want to find out from Nadmo. Madam Charlotte Norman, does Nadmo prepare such reports?
I think to a large extent, we have been preparing reports, but I'm not sure how, it sort of reflects our environmental impacts. Yes, we have been preparing some reports, but I'm not sure how it's been affecting or having an effect on environmental impact, But listening to what the last speaker said, I think, like he said, the policies are there. It's just about implementation, and who are those to implement? Sometimes it's just, I always say, it's just the way we are, unfortunately.
We don't care about these things. It's not really a big deal. They're supposed to do it, we are not doing it. It's all right, let's pass.
Because we have had several engagements with the districts, even with the NADMO at the districts and all the various people on the district disaster management committees. And you realize that there's nobody there who does not know what the right thing is. Everybody knows it. And yet we still come back to the same table discussing the same thing. Who are we? We need to make some real moves. Enough of the talk. I think action is required at this stage, because whether we like it or not, when these heat stress came upon us from January to this time, everybody was impacted. No one can say they didn't feel that extreme heat. We're looking forward to the rains again. Let's see what happens. I mean, these should be daily reminders that something has to be done. Something has to be done, because we can't continue with this firefighting approach. It rains, it gets flooded, NADMO comes in, rains recede, everybody goes to bed, we come in again. No. We have to be a bit more proactive than this.
Interesting. Dr. Yaw Ajimambuafo is a senior research fellow at the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. First of all, I'm going to ask him two questions before he takes leave of us. First of all, does the center or UG itself prepare these environmental impact reports? That's one. And what would he say are the very important things we need to do in terms of building, enhancing capacity and resilience to climate change? Doc.
Hi, again, thank you for the question. I think the issue of preparing environmental reports, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a requirement by any institution in the country, because if an organization at the end of the year prepares its report, annual report, it captures these, issues that it has been involved in, that it has targeted, that, the thing needs to be reported. But again, the EPA, I believe, has certain requirements that it has in place to show how the activities of different organizations are impacting the environment. So EPA does what we call strategic environmental assessment or environmental impact assessment at different levels. So in truth, the Center for Climate Change, for instance, does not need to prepare an environmental report. It just needs to show, also through the university, how its activities, in many ways, have either potentially negatively impacted the environment or has, given some sort of benefit to the environment. That's what I'll attest from. But with regards to how we can, enhance resilience, I think we know the problems. We also actually know the solutions. Okay, the problems we've highlighted, from these conversations, are known by all of us. The solutions are also known. There's not like we are hiding somewhere that we need to go and fetch. First of all, the issue of policy, for instance, I think we all acknowledge that there are different policies and institutions in place. What we need is more coherence. And I think for me, policy coherence is so important because if you want to be able to deal with disaster risk reduction or deal with climate change, the organizations need to work together. There needs to be a strong coordination between government agencies, between NGOs, between the private sector stakeholders to ensure that we implement, the issues very well. Because the problem now is that we have everybody doing whatever they want. So there's no proper coordination. Even within the government sector, you'll be surprised that if you go to a district or municipality, people from the EPA will have no idea what the people from NATMO are doing, or they don't involve them. So that's one part. I also think that we need to have, we need to ensure there's adequate funding. Funding is a challenge, and I think my speakers have mentioned this in different ways, that we need to have proper budget allocation and, of course, also enough allocation to deal with the issues that we're talking about. And this will include funding for early warning, capacity building. Because if you have the right people in the right places, there's a good chance that they will help, address some of the issues that we are talking about. And this also involves what we call ensuring that there's a particular financial mechanism at the district, at the ministry, dedicated to dealing with disasters or climate change issues. Of course, there's global support, which is sort of like the Green Climate Fund, for instance, or global environmental facilities. But we need to teach people how to prepare proposals to get these monies to use for different projects. Maybe my last point will be institutional capacity, because I think it's important also. I mentioned it a bit earlier. NATMO is a very key organization, but I don't think they have all the capacity to be able to, do the things they're supposed to be doing. So they need modern equipment. And if you go to GMET, they'll tell you that they need more equipment to have better, weather forecasting. And I think that's something that should be a conscious effort that we need to train and invest, more in for us to deal with some of the challenges that we are expecting to face due to climate change. Because the reality is that the issues of climate change, we don't know all of it yet. And we are supposed to have more, impact that we probably have never seen before. So we need to be better and adequately prepared so that at least we can minimize the negative impact that it will have on our communities and households. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc, for enlightening us on this very matter. It's also important that we remind listeners that we actually invited the EPA to join us around this roundtable today, but unfortunately they could not make it this morning. So I'm sure on another day on another platform we'll be able to engage the EPA to know what they are doing concerning all these challenges. But the last comment that Doc touched on, which is the money part, the finance, that is, first of all, if the developed world has caused a lot of the climate challenges and we haven't caused as much, are they giving us money to help fight? Because we can refuse to do it, but you are saying that it doesn't help if we worsen the case. Is there money available from the developed world, the developed north, to the underdeveloped south? Yes, Doc.
Yes, I think I did touch on the fact that there are global, what we call global funds or global financial or funding opportunities that exist. And a lot of these global funds, the monies that are, pledged to these funds are coming from, the developed world, or what we call the global north countries. So for instance, there's a financial mechanism for the Green Climate Fund, DCF. And Green Climate Fund, always request for proposals apart from countries, from organizations, from institutions to address climate change issues. So if you can submit, if a country or an organization like even the EPA or private bodies can submit proposals to the Green Climate Fund on an intervention that is being done, they will review it and then give funding to that. And then there's also something called the Global Environment Fund, exists, and which also is a way of providing funding for countries, especially from the less developed countries or part of the world, and then they give them. But there's more recently, there's a promise fund called the loss and damage. Loss and damage made out of the last, what they call the COP, which is allowing, countries to also be giving support, be able to, deal with the impact that climate change has. But I have to end by saying that, international development agencies, like for instance, the USAID and other ODAs, like even JICA, they provide funding for different climate change impact assessment projects across countries. USA, for instance, has funded several climate change impact assessments of different countries in the world. And I think these are just examples to show that yes, there's some sort of collective action globally, but also sometimes depends on who's in power. If the country's president is not in favor, then funds may not come as it's supposed.
Thank you so much, Doc. Doc, I'm reminded of the fact that you are to go into another meeting.
Yes, I have to. My time is at the other thing.
Oh, okay, so any final words before you take leave of us?
I would say that these conversations are important, and as we keep having them, my hope is that the different stakeholders are brought on board, including people at the community level, people who are actually real victims and impact of climate change, so that they tell their stories, and these stories may actually galvanize actions much better, so that we don't just do the discussion at the round table, but also we look at actual events and issues that are happening at different parts of the country. And also, again, I have to emphasize that Ghana is not just Accra. We are facing issues all across the country. If you go to Elembele, if you go to Enchi, if you go to every part of the country, they are facing the impact of climate change. Accra is just, a micro, scope of all the issues that are happening. So let's always look beyond Accra or Kumasi and explore the issues beyond Accra. Thank you.
Dr. Yaw Ajimamboafo, who is a senior research fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at University of Ghana. He joined us on the ZED Roundtable this morning. Thank you so much, Doc. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Okay, let's come back into the studios and come to the Director for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction, NADMO. Let's first of all look at the education, because it's something you touched on, that we need to educate people, even the issue that you were talking about, separating our waste and all that to help in recycling. What are the measures that NADMO is putting in place to educate us as a people to ensure that, because I always say that if we did what we're supposed to do, NADMO would have very little work to do, right? Yeah, because then the disasters and all the rest. So what are some of the education that is being done before we get to Mr. Isaka Amonkote? What are some of the works you're doing?
Okay, so in terms of our structure, we do have the disaster volunteers, DVGs, disaster volunteer groups, who are not paid staff of NADMO, but then they volunteer to be of use or of help whenever disasters occur. Now, with these disaster volunteers, we have them in the schools, so even all the way to from SHS universities, and then we have them people who live within the communities, because you and I also, we live in a certain community. And so people, when a disaster occurs, before NADMO comes, before National Ambulance, before Fire Service, there are people present within that area who can immediately perhaps register some help before the bigger picture comes in.
This is not theory, this is real.
It's real.
In my community, there are DVGs.
Yes.
How will I know who the DVG people are? Who are the members of the group?
Well, some of them are registered.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they are registered with NADMO. We have a whole list of them. From time to time, as and when we have funding, we try to bring some of them together and sort of give them some basic education in terms of what to do in regarding response and all that. Apart from that, I mean, the climate change department in NADMO, we have thought that, I mean, how do you get people to change their mindset? Somebody who is over 30, over 40, over 50, they kind of get used to the old ways of doing things. So we went down to the schools and engaged the teachers. We trained over 1,000 school teachers on climate change issues, on resilience, on disaster risk reduction, because these people would be in a better position to hand down that information, disseminate it better than we would. They are qualified to do that. And so we had that done in the 5 northern regions of the country. Apart from that, like I said, we have engagements with communities. Recently, I think 2-3 weeks ago, we had training on disaster risk reduction. The basic things with women in Greater Accra. the training I said was in the north, and then this women training was in Accra. So we don't limit what we do to only Accra. We have worked in the Western region, we have worked in the Central region. We do information sharing, dissemination. Sometimes we do role play where people themselves are given scenarios and say, listen, it's been announced that rain is coming, family A, family B, and we get terrific information. Apart from that, we also do simulation exercises, which we simulate scenarios, and people sort of enact, and basically the government entities or the stakeholders who are responsible at the district level are part of this, and they now know what roles they are supposed to play during disasters, during disaster communication. We link up with the media. We have had some training with some media personalities. And so we do a lot of things. I mean, it's a shame that we don't have enough time, but NADMO is not just about rice and oil and mattresses and, being called. No. My department, we don't go on the field to do that. There's a department that looks at relief and response and all those things. They
are the ones we see.
Yes, they are the ones you see. And so there's a lot that goes on. There are several departments in NADMO. If you come to the headquarters, we have a department for disease epidemics. We have the climate change, fires and lightning, man-made disasters. There's so many departments. And all these departments work together, except that because the work we do is not directly, you don't see any rise, you don't see anything. People tend to say, oh, NADMO, they're not doing anything. But it's not true. Baby steps, but we're doing a lot.
Interesting. Mr. Monkote, if I can find out from you, do you see our efforts at managing the climate, the resilience, the climate change, climate adaptation, mitigation, as a people, first of all, and then we come to as a government? Do you see our efforts as doing this thing in a very coordinated fashion? Do you think we're doing enough, if I could put it bluntly? Mr. Amogote. Okay. All right. So let's come back, because you were there's a litany of things that you just said, which I didn't know. I mean, this is the first time I'll be very honest about the disaster volunteer groups. Because a lot of the things you're saying, educating the masses would have solved all that. What is your challenge within NADMO that holds you back from communicating all these beautiful things you are doing to the general public in terms of discussion today?
Yeah, so I mean, we're quite happy when we have platforms like this, where we can sort of use that as a leverage to expand or tell the general public on some of the things that we do, which seems to be on the blind side of people. But then specifically, we zoom into, like I said, schools. I mean, there's so many schools. If you go there and you ask of NADMO, they know at least the basics, what we do, what they should do, the do's and don'ts, etc. Because we have clubs in some of these schools.
You have clubs as well?
Yes, we do have clubs in some of these schools. There's a lot that we're doing. We're looking at sovereign risk transfer of insurance when you talk about risk financing. So we're looking at insurance for smallholder farmers in the northern parts of the country, where people are encouraged to go into agriculture, and therefore when you go, there's a hedge, there's a leverage. The government is going to pay insurance so that in the event of drought, for instance, you don't see people migrating to the bigger cities, to Accra, creating slum areas, because when you come to Accra and you don't know anybody, you remember there's somebody who speaks your language, you settle where they settle, bit by bit, it becomes a big problem. And so these are some of the things that we're trying to do. It has a ripple effect. If you don't tackle it from the source, it's going to come down and play back at us. And so we are doing, like I said, baby steps. There's so much going on. Again, apart from the insurance that we're trying to get for those in the farmers, smallholder farmers, and it's going to be a sovereign risk transfer, meaning that it's not going to be at the cost of the farmers, it's going to be at the cost of the government.
Exactly.
And we have accessed the Global Shield, which is one of the climate funding sources, who are quite ready to pay the premium for us to do that.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and this whole insurance thing is being coordinated by the African Risk Capacity, which is an African-owned and led insurance facility. And so other countries have already assessed this. They've even received payouts, which has helped people, farmers, smallholder farmers, so that people's children don't have to drop out of school because there was a drought, because there was a famine, because there was floods, etc. Apart from that, even the rains that we have, the flooding we have in Accra, Allianz and Swiss Re, these are international insurance companies. They have also, together with NADMO and Ministry of Finance, developed an insurance product to cover the flooding in Accra. So apart from the sensitization, apart from what we're doing, we're also looking at the other end of adaptation, which is insurance. So that's the backstop, the last stop. So if all these fail, what else do? We rely on insurance, payouts. And so all these are in the process, and it's all being led by NADMO.
We have 9:45, which means that we have just 10 minutes to wrap up this show and call it a week, not a day, a week, because Z in the morning is wrapping up for the week. Does NADMO have a communications department?
Yes, indeed, we have.
And they work. I mean, they I'm finding out because you're saying stuff that I was thinking that because climate change affects all of us, it should be known by as many of us as possible so that we understand these things. So let me look at your department. What is the setup of the department like? Run me through, give me an idea of the climate change department within NADMO. What is the department like?
Okay, so we realized that the major disasters that are happening in this country would be the one that talks about too much water or too less water, the one that talks about humidity, temperature rise, so that leads to drought, flooding, bushfires. We look at deforestation, we look at afforestation, we look at sustainable livelihoods, we look at so many things. So within the department, we have had series of projects that we've worked on. I mean, currently we have about 5 projects that we're working on. One of them is a Greater Accra Resilience Project, where we are, on our component, we are looking at flood early warning systems. So within that component, we're working with Water Resource Commission, Works and Housing, GMET, and NADMO. And then Ghana Hydrological Authority now. Yes. So these 5 people, institutions are in this component, looking at flood early warning. So this is part of one of the projects that the climate change department is engaged in.
On that, GMET tells us that, okay, there's a rain coming from Benin, Togo, they'll say something like that. Then what? Let's assume your flood early warning system is in full flow and it's working. What would happen? I mean...
So what happens is we get the information, the alert from GMET, for instance, and then we disseminate it to the regions, the districts, and then the districts further take it to the zonal level, because that is...
How are you disseminating this information?
Okay. So unfortunately, we don't have too much time, but I'll just give you a brief.
Yes, please help me out.
So we have NADMO at the headquarters, which is situated in Accra. Then we have the regions, the regional NADMO offices. So Greater Accra, we have a regional NADMO office, and all other regions. Then every district, in all the districts, we have NADMO offices that have directors and replicated of what is at the headquarters. And so when we get these alerts, what we do is we get it from GMET through emails, through phone, and etc. And then we send it through the GOTA system, because all our directors, a majority of them have the GOTA. So depending on the areas that GMET has told us, we sort of make sense of the information they give to us and then translate it to our district officers, who will then also make more sense of it and say, listen, we're expecting this here, so people should do this. So we work a lot at the district level with the Information Services Department. So after this, what we need now is the feedback mechanism, which is supposed to guide us and give us data and tell us that because of how timely or how effective that weather information came through, we didn't lose anybody, we didn't lose anything. That feedback mechanism should be there to support us to know what is being done right or wrong. So, but currently, the information is disseminated, I would dare say 100%.
Wow.
Yes.
So the early warning system is one project. What is it? You said 3. What is the next project?
Oh, well, apart from the GARID project, we're working on the African Risk Capacity project, which I told you about the insurance for the smallholder farmers. Again, we're working on an ECOWAS project, which is looking at offering flood relief for victims of 2022 flood. So currently we have done a lot. We are actually in the process of giving boreholes to certain communities that have no water at all. I mean, I myself with a team have gone around certain schools, communities within Accra, and you wouldn't believe some of the things that we saw. And so
in Accra?
Yes, in Accra. There's the huge need for water. So we're working on that. Again, we have done training of women. We have worked with persons living with disability, because when there are disasters, usually there's a rush to save, and then sometimes some of these people are left behind, and it's important that they are brought along and they feel part of the society and community. And so we're doing that as well. We have a strategy developed with them in terms of disaster risk reduction. Apart from that, we're doing, there's so many projects we're working on.
I can understand. So over the past 8 years, or maybe even a decade, would you say we're winning the war?
I think that this war is not going to be won in a day or two. It's not going to, because it didn't start. It accumulated over decades.
Centuries.
And so if you want to take 1 decade to sort of come to and make an analysis of whether we're winning or not, that would be a bit different. But what is sure is that there is action towards relieving us of where we find ourselves at the moment.
There is this critical temperature that we are told that if we reach, then there is basically no future for humanity, because water levels are going to rise and flooding and all that. As a matter of fact, there are countries around the world that know that in the next 2 decades, especially the island nations in the low-lying areas, sometime in the Pacific or something, that the whole country will disappear. Is there a future for humanity in terms of climate change? Have we gone beyond a point where all we can do is adapt and really not mitigate?
I wouldn't say so. I think definitely there is a future for humanity. I mean, what would life be without hope? Definitely there is a future for humanity. And again, I think when it comes to the discussion around climate change, we usually focus on the downside of it and not look at the other side, the other picture. Because I recently read in a journal that there's been some breakthrough, some headway regarding the emissions, how to even make sure that it doesn't reach a certain level in the stratosphere or troposphere. And so it is very important that we don't only look at the downside, but also we look at things like the advantages. What advantage can we take out of this? And I can tell you, as a country, one of the big advantages that we found was that when we want to access funding, I mean, any donor would say, where is your data? Where is the information that proves that, yes, this is what it is, and this is how you want to get here in the next 10 years, for instance. And so our lack of data, but then our need for support has forced us into getting data.
And that's a positive.
Yes, indeed it is. Because now we have data to a certain extent, which we didn't have. Even though we were working in the space, we didn't think that we should keep data.
Yeah, but now it's forcing us to.
Yes.
So you spoke about ECOWAS. That would be my last touch. And then the need for international cooperation, because like you said in your first submission, this is not a Ghana problem, it's a whole world problem. How are we performing with regards to climate resilience as compared to our neighbors?
Okay, so I don't think that these things, like I have said, can be done in isolation. And so there's this project, for instance, the Volta Basin Authority, and it's linked to all the 6 countries through which the Volta runs through. And so what we are doing is we're looking at flood and drought, and so we're looking at it in the northern part and in the Volta Basin as well. We just completed some work on that. So what it means is that I cannot say Ghana is ahead of X country or A country. But what I can say is that lots of countries within the ECOWAS region have already accessed insurance for their farmers, for instance, which Ghana has not done.
Oh, so we are rather behind.
So, well, just in that regard.
In the insurance regard.
Apart from that, the fact that we haven't paid does not mean that we don't have the expertise, because even though Ghana has not bought the insurance yet, I still get moved to other countries who have even bought it to sort of help them to understand more about what this insurance is about.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wow. So the war goes on. The climate challenge will not end today. We would just need to do a lot more work on it. And it's been an interesting discussion this morning on our roundtable. And if you're listening to us, you heard Dr. Yao Ajiman-Boafo, who is a Senior Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. Mr. Isaka Monkote, local governance expert, also joined us on phone. And we had in the studio Madam Charlotte Norman, who is a Director for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction at NADMO. It's been an interesting discussion. This was part 2 of enhancing capacity and resilience to climate change. But that also brings us to the end of our week's edition of ZED in the Morning. It's been an interesting week. We thank you so much, Madam, for joining. We would come and look for the communications department of NADMO so that we work together with them to push stuff out, and so that Ghanaians know. It's been an interesting week. But before we go, DJ Pete Wade has done an amazing job throughout the week. From Monday, Ben also massive support from our crew, Mr. Victor Addo, as well, Abdullah Saka, our stand-in producer, and then Mr. Alex Mensah, our boss. Thank you so much for making it a great week. Next week, we start on Monday with a special edition because of the Eid of ZED in the Morning. What else can we say? As always, we're leaving this. We'll do this again next week. But before we go, pray like it only depends on God, but still work like it only depends on you. We'll do this again tomorrow, people. Have a great one next week.
It's your lifestyle.